Okay, here we go. We are back for another episode of the podcast here. If you are listening on audio, if you have the opportunity to switch over to video, this thing is going to be on Spotify and on YouTube. There is some visual that is associated with this that might be really helpful as I'm going to walk through the dietary guidelines for Americans today. And I'm kind of walking right through the document, going to go down, give my quick review on things here. Quick in and out. Just going to spare you any kind of just going to spare you any type of confusion or anything that might be going along with these new guidelines. Honestly, my initial opinion, my initial response to this is that they are quite good. They're not that much different from the previous guidelines in 2020. However, I do think they've been revamped to be a little bit more helpful and a little bit more beneficial. I also do think, and maybe it's just because of the field I'm in, but it's been a little more polarizing this time, right? There's been a lot of things floating around with the whole Make America Healthy Again and everything like that. This is kind of an opportunity to see, like, okay, are these recommendations actually supporting that or not? And I think a lot of people just have not been aware of the dietary guidelines for Americans for a lot of years. I mean, I still, in my profession here as a dietitian, a lot of people, mention to me like, oh, the food pyramid, the food pyramid. But what people don't realize is that the food pyramid was actually retired in 2011, right? Since 2011, we've been doing MyPlate and that type of thing, right? And a lot of people don't really know about MyPlate. People seem to be really caught up on the food pyramid, which is a thing of the past. I mean, that's literally 15 years old at this point. So I think it's kind of a smart play that they went back to the food pyramid. Obviously, they kind of flipped it upside down, and there's some recommendations being made here that I think are really interesting, right? So just gonna hop right into it. These are gonna be quick hitters. Don't want this to take too long. I want these podcast episodes to be about 15 to 20 minutes long. I always say like the perfect cardio, perfect cardio material. Use this for your 15 to 20 minute cardio warm up in the gym. Educate yourself. Listen to these. Get smarter. Get more informed on nutrition. And by the time your cardio is done, you'll be you'll know more about nutrition as well. So let's take a look through the guidelines here. Obviously, we got this beautiful little upside down triangle picture. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. What I really want to go through here is I really want to go through the recommendations and just talk about like where did they do a really good job. Also, there is, if you are looking at the photo, there is a little bit of confusion here. I think just right from the top within the pyramid, right, in terms of like what's being recommended in terms of the photos or the graphic here about foods. And what's being recommended in the actual recommendations when you dig into them a little bit. Okay, so let's get going here, right? So I love the initial message, right? The initial message is literally just to eat. It says the message is simple: eat real food. This is directly off of their guidelines, and I can't agree more. Okay, I do think obviously Americans and just human beings in general at this point, we are consuming way too many ultra processed foods. Okay, like that's just the reality of the situation. I think something like 70% of the American diet is coming from processed foods, right? And if you think about it, it's so simple, right? You get up in the morning, you, I don't know, grab a Pop Tart or some kind of a waffle or something, you throw it in quick, you eat it on the way to work, or maybe you stop by Starbucks and you do some kind of a, I don't know, egg bagel thing or egg white bite or something like that, right? And it's just everything's processed. Then you go to work, you kind of snacking on little things, bags of popcorn, whatever throughout the day, some Cheez-Its or some crackers or whatever's in the office. And then, a little more snacks throughout the day. You might have a normal dinner, and then you're probably going to have some kind of a processed food snack at night, right? So it makes a lot of sense that there's way too much ultra processed food in the American diet right now. So I love this message here, just to like eat real food. I don't think, like, honestly, if people would just stop the overconsumption of ultra processed foods, that would handle 80% of the battle. Okay, like the majority of where people are going wrong, or where people are getting, I would say, the wrong nutrition or really kind of stubbing their toe, is this consumption of ultra processed food, because the macros on these things are terrible, right? You're going to be low protein, you're going to be high carb, higher fat, higher salt, higher simple carbohydrate, very little fiber, very little water. Really no nutritional value in any kind of a way, right? You're not getting a lot of vitamins or minerals out of these things. So if we could literally just make that shift and just stop eating things that are ultra processed, and just stop eating things that are ultra processed and coming out of a bag or a package or whatever, you're going to do yourself a massive favor right there. So if you take nothing from the rest of this episode, just try to consume less processed foods, less ultra processed foods, I would say, and replace that with more whole foods, and you're already doing yourself a massive favor and benefit right there. Okay, so that's the take home. The take home is to eat more real food, which I really do love, right? So, scrolling through here, next thing down the line, eat the right amount for you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. That's obvious, right? I think like the big thing to understand is a lot of people still get caught up in like, do calories matter? Or do I just need to eat less carbs? Or what's going on? Is it my cortisol? Is it my insulin? Calories matter, okay? Calories 100% are the king. They have always mattered. They will always matter, irregardless of what's going on hormonally or with insulin or blood sugar or whatever. That's how you control these things, right? Is with a proper caloric intake. So I've always said, make sure you find the proper caloric intake that fits your goals, okay? That's going to be different for everybody. This is really important for people to understand, but you need to consume a calorie, level that promotes the body composition or health or energy or wellness goals that you have, okay? So quick one over there. Now here's a huge one, okay? Prioritizing protein foods at every meal. So they did a huge upgrade to the protein recommendation here, all right? It used to be 0.8 grams per kilogram, which is about like 0.3 grams per pound, which is literally not near enough. That is pathetic, honestly. The fact that it's taken us until 2026 to finally upgrade this recommendation, the science has been there for a long time. So I love to see this, right? 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of your body weight, all right? So that's averaging out to about, 1 or 0.5 to 0.7 grams per pound. And really, if you're looking through the science, I know if you guys follow me, if you've listened to the podcast in the past, you've heard me pushing a lot of 0.8 to 1 gram per pound. I still like that level, but at this point, I am, the science is pretty clear. It's not required to maximize your body composition and essentially, not be protein deficient, right? So if you're going for 0.5, 0.6 or anywhere above, you're going to be in a really good spot there. So I love the idea here that they have made this recommendation to increase your protein up to 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of your body weight. That's huge. Now, where there's a little bit of discrepancy here, I would come over here, right? So what they recommend is they say consume a variety of protein foods from animal sources, including eggs, poultry, seafood, and red meat, as well as a variety of plant source protein foods, including beans, peas, lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds, and soy. All right, so the reality here is that if you're looking for the quickest hit, the best way to get the most protein into the diet, then absolutely animal proteins are the way to go, right? You're going to want to increase your animal protein consumption just because it's the most bang for your buck in terms of protein, right? If I eat a chicken breast, I'm getting 95 or 99% of the calories that I'm consuming from that chicken breast are coming directly from protein. So if I'm trying to increase my protein intake, that's the fastest and easiest way to do it, or to have a protein shake, or to, whatever. Anything that's predominantly protein with very little carbohydrate or very little fat is obviously going to move the needle faster. When we compare that to a plant-based protein like a bean or a lentil or a legume or something along those lines, probably the best you're going to do on those is about only 20% of the calories in those foods coming from protein, right? So if I eat 6 ounces of chicken, I'm going to get about 50 grams of protein, right? If I eat 6 ounces of lentils, I at best might be getting about 15 grams, right? So that's a mega discrepancy there. And then also the calorie consumption of those lentils or that plant-based food might be a little bit higher because there's carbs in the mix, there's fats in the mix. So that's kind of the reality of the situation. But I will also say this, I think from a longevity and a health and a wellness-based standpoint, you kind of want to flip that on its head, right? So if we look at the research around protein and I guess, protein supporting health and longevity, it's actually the opposite, right? So plant-based proteins are going to be most supportive of health and longevity. Then we're going to go down the line to dairy. Then it goes down to fish and then meats, right? So me being a massive protein proponent and a big omnivore myself, I'm a big meat eater. I'm not saying to disregard, like, don't eat animal proteins, but I do think it's more about finding that balance of, like, we definitely want plant proteins in the mix, right? We definitely want beans and peas and lentils and legumes, right? Honestly, I don't even put nuts and seeds really in the category of protein. Those are just really heavy on fat, really high on calories. You're not going to get enough protein to move the needle, compared to the amount of calories you're going to consume in those foods. So don't really consider those. But finding that balance where it's not all red meat and it's not all steak and eggs basically to get your protein, right? We definitely want to mix in some plants. We want to mix in some dairy proteins because those are actually going to be a little bit more supportive of your overall health and longevity, right? So number one, we want to get you to that 1.2 to 1.6 grams per pound, or 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of your body weight in protein. But we do want to do it with a variety of proteins, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be, meats first, like is kind of being recommended or suggested here. All right. All right, moving down the line, quickly covering dairy. So honestly, the one thing I would say is, like, full fat dairy. We're going to come back to this when it comes to saturated fats or the fat recommendation, but, like, I don't know. I don't really love the full fat dairy idea. Just, it says full fat dairy with no added sugars. But the reality of the situation, a lot of people think that as soon as you take some of the fat out of dairy, right, and you go down to a skim or a 1 or 2%, that all of a sudden they have to put in sugars and fillers and all that stuff. That's not really the case. Well, it's not the case. So essentially all they're doing there is they're just filtering the fat out of the milk. They're not adding anything to it. All right. So from a calorie consumption standpoint, I think there's value to doing lower fat. From a saturated fat consumption standpoint, I think there's value to doing lower fat dairy options. And also from other health benefits, like, I don't know, reducing uric acid and things like that. You also get a benefit from the lower fat dairy, right? So personally, I'm going to say continue to do lower fat dairy because you're going to get all the same protein. You're going to get the same amount of carbohydrate. You're just going to get less fat, less saturated fat, and considerably less calories, okay? So when we're trying to manage, number one, king of the equation here, the calorie equation, I do think it's a little bit easier just to do lower fat options because it's just going to help you manage your caloric intake, and it's going to have no impact on, your protein intake or anything like that you would be getting from the dairy. Or any of the nutrients, really. Maybe you'd lose a little bit of fat soluble vitamins or whatever if you filter out, half the fat, but probably not anything that's going to, ruin your life. This one's huge. I love that they mentioned gut health this time around. All right, I think that's like this is obviously a huge upgrade. I think at this point we do know kind of that relationship between gut health and total health and even brain health. The gut-brain connection is a big topic of discussion nowadays. And in general, right, like finding and in general, improving your gut health is going to really help just manage inflammation and just in general increase your digestion and improve your energy and improve nutrient availability and nourishment overall. So I think this is a huge upgrade to the recommendations, right? So the fact that they even mention gut health, I think, is really, really cool. And like right here, you can see it. They're talking about the microbiome, right? And supporting your microbiome. And it says a healthy diet supports a well-balanced microbiome and healthy digestion, which is spot on, right? Highly processed foods can disrupt this balance. Absolutely. So this is, again, where that call to consume less ultra-processed foods kind of comes back into the mix, and I love this. And then it says, while vegetables, fruits, fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, miso, and higher fiber foods support a diverse microbiome, which may be beneficial for health, right? So I think they're really on a nice... I think they've really done a nice job here to mention this and mention the foods that are most supportive of microbiome. Most people think it's, about taking probiotics and elixirs and this and that. And really, at the end of the day, the best way to support a healthy microbiome is all of the above, right? It's like getting adequate fiber, having a variety of plant foods in your life, having fermented foods in the life, and all from whole food sources. Those are the best way to impact and improve and diversify a healthy microbiome. Okay, so I think this is a huge addition to the recommendations, and I thought this was really cool when I saw this. I didn't really expect it, but it was a pleasant surprise to see this. So kudos on that one. Okay, now here we go. This one is where it gets a little bit hazy. Okay, so the incorporating healthy fats. All right, so this was like the big topic of discussion, and everybody thought that the government was gonna, relax on their recommendation with saturated fat and tell all the American public that saturated fat is fine and there's no worries here. But the reality of the situation is that they did not change their recommendation. So it says right here, plain text, in general, saturated fat consumption should not exceed 10% of total daily calories, okay? So if I'm eating 2,000 calories a day, saturated fat should not be, more than 10% of those 2,000 calories. All right, so it says significantly limiting highly processed foods will help meet this goal. I love this idea, okay? So if you look into the research, and this is And I love this because honestly, if you're going to look into the research, you'll see that the large majority, probably about half of the saturated fat in the American diet is coming from ultra processed foods, right? So it's coming from things like, baked goods and cookies and crackers and, just lower quality foods in general, right? Not necessarily all from whole foods. So typically what's going to happen is, when someone's told to reduce their saturated fat, they're going to be told to reduce their red meat intake, reduce eggs, reduce butter, reduce cheese, all of that stuff, right? And yes, we do need to moderate our intake of that stuff because 10% of total daily calorie intake is a very small amount, right? So we're still going to have to moderate our intake of these saturated fat rich whole foods. But at the end of the day, I think in a lot of cases, most people, their first play is going to be to like, oh, I'm just going to stop eating eggs or I'm going to never eat red meat again. You're going to lose a lot of benefit nutritionally from doing that, right? Because you're going to lose all of the vitamins and the minerals and things like that that are in these products that honestly are super helpful for human health, right? Whether it's, in eggs, we got choline, we got a bunch of these fat soluble vitamins. In meats, they're rich in iron and zinc and things like that. So we want to have those in the diet to an extent, right? Where we're not getting any benefit is with ice cream and cookies and, cakes and, whatever, these processed foods that are providing a lot of saturated fat that is typically unnecessary and there's no nutritive value to any of these foods. So I love their call to action there in terms of reducing your saturated fat consumption from processed foods first. But I also think like where there's definitely going to be some confusion here is this, right? Like healthy fats are plentiful in many whole foods such as, meats, poultry, eggs, omega-3 rich, seafood, things like that. And then obviously we go down the line to our plant source fats where like that's typically what I recommend is like any saturated fat that we are getting in the diet, we don't really want to get it from animals. We definitely want to get it more from plants. So if we can do, leaner cuts of meat, if we can do, eggs and stuff are fine. They're not really that high in saturated fat, maybe not eating 6 to 12 a day, right? Maybe we keep it to 2 to 3, but we can still get some really nice benefits there. But I think where there's going to be an issue is most people aren't going to go this far into the document and actually look at the recommendations. They're going to stay right up at the top here with the picture. Right, so if we go back up to the top and we're looking at the reverse pyramid, at the top of the pyramid is like the chicken with the skin, cheese, red meat, a steak, whole milk, right? If we just stick to the top of the pyramid here, you're going to far exceed your daily recommendation for saturated fat. There's no way around it. You can't eat cheese, whole milk, butter, steaks in the same day and keep your saturated fat consumption under 10% of your total daily calorie intake. It's just not going to happen, right? So this is again where I think like there's a little bit of like some confusion. They could have done a better job on this. They could have recommended, leaner cuts of meats and more fish and things like that at the top. And then moved those more saturated fat heavy foods like the whole milk and the red meat and the cheese and that type of thing down, closer to the bottom where like the butter's sitting basically, right? So I do think that's probably like the big this will be the area where there's like the most confusion. Is like, wow, you're telling me that I should eat more red meat, more butter, more cheese, full fat dairy, but what's that doing to my fats? So the reality of the situation is like, this is probably where they've kind of, I would say, for lack of a better term, screwed this up the most, is with this fat recommendation. Now, everything that's in writing here is great, right? It's like, nuts, seeds, olive oils, avocados, things like that. I still highly recommend, like, keep your animal saturated fat low. Eat the leanest cuts of meat you can possibly eat. Avoid the butter, avoid the coconut oil, avoid the full fat dairy, all these things that are just really jacking up your saturated fat intake. Stick more to the lean meats and the plant sourced fats like olives, olive oil, avocado, nuts and seeds, right? Omega-3 fat rich seafood is obviously a great choice as well. And then start to limit in other areas, right? Because I think this is like the area where they probably, like I said, maybe screwed it up a little bit in terms of the recommendations. Although, the recommendation is fine. It's like the foods that they're recommending to meet the recommendation is, very, I guess, counterintuitive to what the recommendation is, right? So just be careful there. The whole grains being at the very bottom of the pyramid, right? Like they've basically drawn a line here in the sand, and then whole grains are under the line of like the foods they want you to consume. I still think you can get a ton of benefit from, some whole grains, right? I mean, they're high in fiber. If you're an athletic individual or you're somebody who has a higher carbohydrate consumption, there's no issues with whole grains. They're not going to hurt you in any kind of a way. There's still, like I said, good fiber, good nutrition. I think for the general population, would it be a good idea to reduce the general carbohydrate intake? Yeah, I would. But I would kind of put the same argument together as I would for the healthy fats, right? It's just like, most people aren't getting fat because they eat too many bowls of oatmeal or too many, bowls of quinoa or barley or, whatever, or brown rice, right? Really where we're going wrong is with the ultra processed foods, right? So again, the whole grains are not hyper palatable in any kind of a way. But what they're recommending here is to significantly reduce the consumption of highly processed, refined carbohydrates such as white bread, ready-to-eat packaged breakfast options, tortillas, crackers. So that's on point, right? That's not really what's pictured. What's pictured is like a bowl of oatmeal. So again, I think if you kind of go into this with the mindset of like, yeah, if it's a whole food source, you're probably okay. You just want to make sure that you're structuring your diet in a way where your macronutrients support whatever the need is, right? So if you're a sedentary person and you're not on the treadmill listening to this right now, you're sitting at a desk, you're sitting on your couch, you're sitting at your office, you're sitting in your car all day long, then yes, your need for carbohydrate is very small, and you probably would do better to reduce that and go with that more protein, vegetable, fruit, a little bit of fat focused diet. And on the flip side, if you're super active, if you're an athletic or very active individual, then a lot of these carbs need to be reintroduced back into the diet, right? So you're still going to want to do the protein and the vegetables and the fruits, but you're absolutely going to want to kind of increase your consumption of fiber dense quality carbohydrate, and you actually do get more leeway in terms of some of this more starchy, less fibrous carbohydrate, because those are perfect for, before and during exercise, right? So again, to each their own here. It all depends on the individuality of the person, but these are kind of the big things, right, that we want to focus on. And I just want to make sure we're clearing up any confusion. Bowls of oatmeal and stuff are not bad, but bowls of cereal and, 3 slices of white bread toast with butter on it in the morning, probably not the play, right? And then that's pretty much it. I mean, at the end of the day here, like that's it. They go down the line. They say limit highly processed foods, added sugars, refined carbohydrates. That's probably the one last place here where I really wanted to make note is with the added sugars. So I love this, right? Like it says no amount of added sugar right here. While no amount of added sugar or non-nutritive sweeteners is recommended or considered part of a healthy or nutritious diet, one meal should contain no more than 10 grams of added sugar. So basically they've made the call to just eliminate added sugar. And I think that's the smartest thing to do, right? Where we can, just take a less is best method here. Like where you can reduce your consumption of added sugars, reduce it, right? That doesn't mean like you're good with fruit, you're good with, any kind of sugar that comes in dairy that you're consuming. Those are not added sugars, right? When you're looking at the back of a label, when you're looking at the back of the package, there's going to say, total sugars, 15 grams. Added sugar is 12. If you're seeing something like that, that's a lot of added sugar. You don't want to see that, right? You may look at a different package and it may say total sugars 15 grams, added sugars 0 or 3 grams or something. That's obviously what we want to look for, right? So it's not necessarily that all sugar is a death wish and all sugar is bad for you, but we certainly want to limit the amount of exposure we have to the added sugars. Typically, the more added sugar, also the more hyperpalatable and the harder it is to stop eating those foods, right? So just in general, I think this is a really nice call to action just to, again, just say that, listen, like if you're eating a whole food diet, there is not added sugar in that diet. So no amount of added sugar is a good amount of added sugar. And just to be super mindful of that, right? We know that it's going to sneak into the diet in places, but the less often it's in there, the better, right? So I love that that added sugar call to action. Honestly, I wouldn't even worry about the non-nutritive sweeteners at all. I think that's kind of just a waste of time, honestly. I don't think there's enough research around, having a little bit of stevia or a little bit of artificial sweetener in a food or whatever, that it's going to do any damage to you, right, in any kind of a way. And in a lot of cases, you look at some of these research reviews about like diet sodas and things like that, where obviously they're loaded with these non-nutritive sweeteners, although they may not be the best thing for gut health. They also are associated with like better, weight loss maintenance and stuff like that, because it gives you the opportunity to get that little bit of something sweet taste, but it doesn't have the impact calorically or on your insulin levels or your blood sugar levels or anything like that. So I would say that is like, don't worry about the non-nutritive sweeteners, but definitely worry about the added sugars. So at the end of the day, that's kind of it, right? Limit alcoholic beverages, sodium. I think you're fine here. I mean, ages 9 to 13, 1,800 milligrams per day. Yeah, you're probably okay to. And then with sodium, obviously the recommendation for, general population 14 and above should consume less than 2,300 milligrams. I love that, right? Again, that's going to be very individual based on, your sweat rate and what you're doing throughout the day. But at the end of the day, like that's kind of it here. I like these recommendations. I think these were the main things that we wanted to focus on. And as I said at the beginning, I do think that call to action, just to go back to real food, is a really smart play. It's not that different from the dietary guidelines that were dropped in 2020. The one big thing is they have really called out added sugars and processed foods, where in 2020 it felt a little bit more bought and paid for by, I hate this term, but like the big sugar, right? Like some of these, companies that produce more of these processed foods, where they were trying to say it's okay to still eat some of this stuff, because we don't want to piss off these companies. And now it's definitely, this dietary guideline is a lot more bought and paid for by the dairy and the meat, as you can tell here. But I do think it's like, when we have an opportunity, like, keep your animal proteins lean, keep a ton of fruit and veg in the diet, and then beyond that, find a little bit of balance with your plant sourced fats and your carbohydrate, right? And if we can do that, and if we can bring it back to a real food diet, we're putting ourselves in a really good position. So hopefully you found that helpful. If you do have questions or comments, this video is going to be up on podcast, it's going to be up on YouTube, it's going to be up on Spotify, where you can get video and stuff. So anywhere you have questions, just wherever you're viewing this, feel free to post the questions below, or give it a like, give it a follow, share it with a friend if you found it helpful. But that is the 2025 dietary guidelines for Americans in a nutshell.